Good evening, everyone. This is Dawn. Thank you for joining this webinar brought to you by ASQ Innovation Division. The topic of tonight's webinar is using crowdsourced funding as a predictor of market demand for innovation. Numerous academic studies have identified that two primary drivers of innovation as technology push what technology advances make possible and demand pull what customers want to buy. One problem individuals and companies often face is that it is an expensive and time-consuming process to bring a new product to market only to find learning after the fact that there is little market demand for the product. This presentation examines the potential use of crowdsourced funding as a predictor for estimating market demand. The learning objectives are the pros and cons of traditional ways of predicting market demand for new products, new methods of predicting market demand using online analytics in general, historic patterns in Kickstarter funding levels for various product categories, and how those funding levels correlate with current market demand. Please note that this webinar is recorded and the recording will be available on ASQ Innovation Division YouTube channel. Also, there will be 5 to 10 minutes time after the presentation for questions and answers. Please post your questions on the Q&A section of the WebEx tool. Tonight, our speaker is Dr. John Pasfield. Thank you, John, for accepting to be our speaker today. John Pasfield earned his PhD in Technology, Leadership, and Innovation from Purdue University. He is the president of Proffer Brainchild Analytics and Innovation, a training and consulting firm that specializes in process improvement and innovation through the use of data analysis. Dr. Pasfield has consulted for hospitals, law enforcement, manufacturing companies, and the Indiana Senate. He has also spoken at numerous conferences across North America, South America, Europe, and Australia. Now I'd like to hand over to our speaker, Dr. John Pasfield. John, please take it away.
Thank you very much, Dawn. Welcome to everyone who is online with me tonight. Look forward to your questions and discussion after the presentation. What I'm going to be showing you is some research that I worked on with two students, Nathan Lewis and Christina Douglas. I want to acknowledge their contributions in some of the data gathering that was done for this project. Two things I want to point out. This is not a final chapter to anything. This is a work in progress, and this is a qualitative study. I'm a numbers person, so I would love to be able to tell you that I can make a prediction with a 90 or 95% confidence. I'm not there yet. This is a work in progress, and as more data is available over time, I think that I'm going to have a useful model. I think it was statistician George Box who said all models are wrong, but some are useful. And so I am working on developing a useful model for making predictions, but that's still a ways off, and what I'm going to be sharing with you tonight is a glimpse of where this is going. As was stated in the introduction to this presentation, there's been numerous studies that look at where innovation comes from, and there are two major forces, and innovation really occurs at the intersection of these two forces. Depending on which paper and which terminology they're using, sometimes it's referred to as market demand or market pull. This is what people want to buy. And technology push, this is what's being made available by advances in technology. So if we look at where market demand and where technology push come from, universities are constantly conducting research. Sometimes that's research on new materials. Sometimes it's on new processes, welding processes, sonic welding, all types of new technologies being developed by universities. Also, there's corporate R&D departments that invest a tremendous amount of money trying to figure out new ways of doing things. Again, could be material related, it could be process related, trying to pack more features into a smaller amount of space, or to take an expensive technology and find a way of bringing that down to make it more accessible to a broader market. And then there's just basic research, new components, new materials. I remember back in the 1980s, 1990s, as miniaturization in consumer electronics was going on, whereas something like a modem used to be a whole bunch of components, then there were single chip modems, and anyhow, the basic research is making more and more things available, but this is all coming from the side called technology push. Advances in technology is making things possible. That doesn't automatically mean that people want to buy what can be made now. When we look at market pull, there's a couple of different directions market pull can go. Sometimes businesses develop tools that they sell to other businesses. The general public might not be interested in this product, but it could be a good business-to-business item. And then there's the business-to-consumer, things that people are going to buy and use in their homes or use in their offices. One of the things that people are constantly looking for, though, is better, cheaper, faster. When I think about advances in cell phone technology over the last 5 or 6 years, we've had cameras in cell phones for a number of years now, so just putting a camera in is not new. But it seems like every year the number of megapixels goes up. Now we're seeing manufacturers that are using 2 or 3 cameras for doing some 3D capture. Sometimes they'll put in a telephoto lens and a standard lens, and then they can use software to do things. But what the public is usually looking for, what the market is looking for, give me a product that's better than what's currently on the market. Give me something faster, whether it's cars or computers, and give me something that's lower cost. So that the market's looking for better, cheaper, faster. Also, there's Kano analysis. I've heard that word pronounced a couple of different ways, so I always heard it referred to as Kano analysis. But if you look at Kano analysis and the basic tenets, there are some characteristics that people want more performance, more memory in their computer, faster microprocessor, more megapixels in their camera. And then Kano analysis also has a category of characteristic called delighters, the things that people didn't even know they wanted. But when a company comes out and offers it to people, they love it, and that becomes the new standard. When they upgrade, they don't want to lose that new feature. So with this brief introduction to push and pull, I want to look at kind of the big picture. If there is no push and there's no pull, we just have the status quo. People are happy with what they have. They're not asking for anything new. And companies aren't really investing money to try and improve what's on the market. We have something that's basically stagnant. It's just not making big advances. If I think about something rather mundane like pencils for taking notes, there really hasn't been any big advances in pencils. They're still made out of wood. They still have a graphite center, still have an eraser on the end. Pencils really haven't advanced much over the last 20, 30 years. So no push and no pull, we just get the status quo. Sometimes we have push without pull. This is where someone has come up with an idea and they go out and they try to market this idea and the market doesn't really want it. Sometimes these are referred to as solutions in search of problems. Somebody has invested time developing something, but nobody really wants it. I used to spend some time going through the U.S. Patent Office. They would publish patents in books, and there were a couple that just kind of stood out to me that, in my opinion, everyone's entitled to their own, but in my opinion, these were solutions in search of a problem. Toe puppets. I've never seen these for sale in a store. Somebody thought it was a good enough idea that they went through the trouble, the time, and the expense of actually getting a patent for toe puppets. I've never heard of anybody saying that they wanted them. There's sunglasses that you can buy. Actually, this isn't limited to sunglasses. This applies to any type of glasses, but there are no stems on these glasses to go over your ears. These are glasses, and there is actually a U.S. patent for this where you can have adhesive magnetic strips that you put on the temples of your head, and then the glasses kind of snap in place with magnets. Again, it's a great example of a patent. Somebody spent money to get a patent on this. I have never ever seen anybody wear these. The market wasn't looking for this. Or my favorite, the wearable seat apparatus. Again, not to pick on the inventors of these things, but people spent money, they had patents issued, and I have never seen anybody wearing a seat apparatus on their belt. These were solutions in search of a problem. Now, while these may be a little bit humorous because they're extreme examples, we can all probably think of items that we have seen that may have actually appeared in stores, but there was no consumer demand for it. They were very quickly put on sale, on clearance, and they never came back in the stores because the market just didn't want them. So that was our second category. If we only have push, it's a solution in search of a problem. If we only have pull, we have unmet needs. And there are numerous unmet needs that we could think about. These are just a couple that come to my mind. Cheap, renewable energy. Windmills, they've been around for years. Solar panels, they've been around for years. They're still kind of expensive. The windmills still require a lot of maintenance. It's a step in the right direction, but as a country, as a world, we still have need for more energy. And while this has some promise to it, there's still a ways to go. So I would say cheap, clean energy is still largely an unmet need. In many parts of the world, just clean water is an unmet need. And certainly when we start looking into healthcare, affordable medication is an unmet need. So if we only have push, it's a solution in search of a problem. If we only have pull, it's an unmet need. Where the magic really happens, where innovation occurs, is when we have both push and pull. Technology has just made something available, a super battery that has great characteristics. You can charge it quickly. It lasts a long time. It holds a lot of charge. And we have a market demand. People want their cell phones to last longer. People want their smartwatches to last longer in between charges. So when I have technology push making things possible and market demand, people saying, I want to buy that, that's where the real innovation occurs. So one of the problems for companies developing new products is trying to assess just how much market demand is there for a product that they haven't actually put on the market. So if I am General Motors, Toyota, Honda, any of the big car companies, I know what the demand is for automobiles, and I may know, based on my sales records, how much do people really value fuel economy. I can look at every car that I've sold over the last 5 or 10 years and see maybe for my customer base, they don't care that much about fuel economy because my less fuel efficient vehicles, my SUVs, are outselling my high fuel efficiency vehicles. But if I'm building something like the 2019 model and I had a 2018 model that was very, very similar to it, assessing market pull is not that difficult. You could guess within a few percentage points probably what the market demand is going to be. Where this becomes much more challenging is, what if I have an idea for a product no one's ever seen before? I have an idea for something that I can't go back and compare it to last year's model or 2 years ago model. This is something brand new. Well, it's hard to predict how much people are willing to spend for that. It's hard to predict how much interest there will be in something that I can't baseline against because it's brand new. So this is a graphic I had a friend of mine make up for me. If you're familiar with the concept of the Ouija board, certainly not endorsing them, but the whole idea is it's almost comical that people would believe you can ask questions and let the spirits guide you to the answer. But if I stick a calculator on the planchette, it looks a little more scientific if I have a calculator on there. There's kind of a semi-art, semi-science of trying to predict the future, trying to predict what the market's going to be. And what I want to do is just look at a couple of existing methods for assessing how much demand there is for a new product, and then look at some of the pitfalls in that, and then I'm going to move into crowdsourcing as a new way of trying to do predictions. So let's take a real example of what I'm talking about. If you'll notice, this is a real article. I've got a citation here at the bottom of the screen. A real article published March 7th of 2010 about what is the demand for 3D televisions. And if you look at the prediction that was made, this is a 2010 article predicting market penetration by 2015. So they're predicting 5 years in advance how many 3D television sets are going to be in the United States. Within that same time frame, we're talking about 2015, 3 years ago, around half the homes in the United States could have a 3D capable display, according to one of their projections. Well, how far off was that prediction? If you look at the second paragraph, it said Insight Media expects 10 million 3D television displays to be sold in 2011, 17 million in 2012, 25 million in 2013, 35 million in 2014, and 50 million in 2015. So between 2010 and 2015, they expected 140 million 3D TV sets to be sold. Well, jumping forward 5 years, when that prediction was supposed to be effective, they predicted half of the homes in the United States would have 3D capable televisions. This was a study done by Statista, 1,009 respondents. But the question is, what's the market penetration of 3D televisions as of October 2015? And you see that prediction that they were going to be in half of the homes in the United States, in reality, they were in about 9% of the homes in the United States. So the prediction was overly optimistic, about 500%. They had predicted more than 5 times as many people would have 3D televisions. Now, for the people that did go out and buy 3D televisions, I'm pretty sure that they feel ripped off because the content never appeared for them. It was a real chicken and egg type of situation. Nobody wanted to generate content in 3D because relatively few people could view content in 3D. And because there's so little content in 3D, nobody wanted to buy a display capable of displaying 3D content. And so this was an attempt to bring a new technology into people's homes. About 9% of the market adopted it, but it fizzled out. It never hit critical mass to really take off. And so companies spent a lot of money developing the technology. Consumers spent some money purchasing the technology, but it never really took off. Were there any clues prior to 2015 that might have warned somebody, you might want to skip this one? Well, there's a couple of things we could look at. I like this analogy. If I am developing a brand new technology and I don't know how much market demand there's going to be for it, it's a little bit like if my wife buys me a birthday present and it's in a box and I can't see what's inside of it. How could I possibly know what's inside of it? Are there any hints that I could get, any clues I could find to help me figure out what's inside of that box short of opening it, because I can't open it until my birthday? Well, there are some things that we could do. Gathering clues about what's inside the box, there's a couple of things I could do. The most obvious, I could pick it up and shake it. Picking it up is going to give me an idea of how heavy it is. If I shake it and I hear it rattle or I hear something rolling around, there's some clues there. It doesn't tell me for sure what it is, but it helps me narrow down the possibilities. I could try to squeeze it to find out if there's a lot of air in the box, or is the box really solid? There's something near the size of the box inside of it. I could hold a magnet to it to see if it's metallic. Of course, if there's any electronic media inside of there, that runs the risk of damaging it. I could x-ray it. That would give me another clue about what's inside of it. If I really, really wanted to try and guess what it is, I could take all of this information, the weight, the dimensions. I could write an app to go out to Amazon, and I could I could narrow it down to a handful of things that are the right size and the right weight. Or if I really wanted to get creative, I could really cheat. Just go to my wife's Amazon orders or her browser history and find out what she's ordered. But the whole point of this analogy is I don't know how much the market is going to want my product until I go through the steps of developing that product and putting it on the market. Of course, by then I've spent a lot of time and a lot of effort, a lot of money to put something on the market. So I would really like to at least have some clues prior to putting it on the market about how much demand there really is. So here's one of the clues. I asked earlier, by 2015, 3D television market penetration in the United States was only about 9%. So if I, as a consumer in 2013, wanted to figure out, should I spend the extra money to get a 3D television, or should I save some money and just get a standard television? Were there any clues that might have told me 3D television isn't going to make it? Well, here's one thing that I could have looked at. Again, this is not a definitive answer, but this is a big clue. If I looked at how many people did Google searches for 3D TV, this is exactly what I would see. You can go out today to trends.google.com, put in any search term that you want, and see how frequently people have searched for it. You can even narrow it down geographically. So these are just searches from the United States. But what I see is, starting in about late 2009, people started getting interested in 3D televisions. If you're wondering why then, well, that's when the movie Avatar came out. The movie Avatar really breathed life into interest in 3D displays because that was an amazing movie with 3D effects. So the movie comes out, there's a tremendous interest in 3D, and that is reflected in Google searches for 3D TV. Then it drops off a little bit, but around December of 2010, everyone's looking for it because around Christmas time, people are looking at spending money, buying new TVs. Interest drops off to about half as much interest as there was in December until the following December, where it spikes again. Following Christmas 2011, interest drops off lower than it was before. By December 2012, there's another spike, but following Christmas 2012, it drops off even more and more and more. We still see a spike even all the way out to 2016. We see a spike around Christmas, but what this tells me is by 2012, there's a pretty clear pattern there that people's interest only spikes around the holidays, and after the holidays, they are less interested than they were the previous year. It's a clue that the market was starting to burn out on the idea of 3D TVs. It was not catching on. If you go back and study some of the original work on diffusion of innovation, Everett Rogers, he received his PhD, went to work for the U.S. Department of Agriculture, and they sent him out to Middle America to try and get farmers to adopt new seeds. He struggled a lot with that because a lot of farmers really didn't want to take advice from somebody fresh out of college. Farmers that have been farming all their life, maybe third or fourth generation farmer, and they really didn't want to take advice from somebody fresh out of college. Dr. Rogers dedicated a good portion of his career to studying how ideas spread and how innovation spreads. He's the one that came up with the diffusion of innovation based on the normal curve. His study, this is really, really summarizing a lot of work that he did, but he said that the key to spreading ideas is getting the innovators to try the new idea. And based on a little bit of success with your innovators, which is a small percentage of the population, you're going to get early adopters who are going to quickly follow the innovators. And once the early adopters adopt the idea, then you're going to get more of the mainstream, what he called the early majority. Once the early majority goes through, then you're going to get the late majority. You may or may not ever get the laggards. The laggards tend to be the people that have the view, if it isn't broke, don't fix it. And if they're happy with the status quo, The laggards may never adopt the new idea. Innovators, on the other hand, the innovators are never happy with the status quo. The innovators are the people that are constantly looking for what's better. I used that phrase earlier, better, faster, cheaper. Your innovators are the people that are constantly looking at how do I get an edge, how do I get more? And so they're willing to try things that the early majority just isn't that interested in. So as a company, what I would love to do is find the innovators, get some feedback from the innovators. Now, one of the things I could do, if I can identify the innovators, I could hold a focus group. I could bring people in and talk to them about, here's some new concepts we have for cars. Here's some features that we may add to a future model of car. What would you think of this? And I could get feedback from forward-thinking people about, yeah, I kind of like that. I'd be willing to spend up to X dollars on that feature. So that's useful information to me. Again, it's part of the clues. No single clue is going to tell me exactly what the market demand for my innovation is going to be, but gathering these clues can help me. I have to point out sometimes early adopters get burned. When I go back and I think about the format wars back in the early 1980s, VHS versus Betamax, there were early adopters that went out and bought Betamax machines before the early adopters and early majority said VHS is the way we're going to go. There were people that spent a lot of money buying movies on Laserdisc, and the market just did not embrace Laserdisc technology. It was a very, very limited technology because it was quickly replaced by other things like DVDs. Even when DVDs came out, there was another format war over high-definition DVD versus Blu-ray. But the whole point is my innovators are the people that are willing to gamble. They're not the type to sit back and wait and see which direction is the market going to go and then jump on the bandwagon. My innovators and my early adopters, they're the ones that, to a degree, direct where the technology is going to go. So as I try and pull all of my clues together, Peter Diamandis came up with what he called the 6 Ds of exponential growth. He said that when things start, there's a phase of deceptive growth. It's growing, but it's small enough that people don't really notice. All of a sudden, by the time the majority of people notice, you're into the disruptive growth. Of course, by the time it becomes obvious and everyone sees it, now you have competitors jumping in. So what we'd really like to do is we'd like to identify this pattern before it grows to the point that it's obvious. Are there things we can do to spot market demand while it's still back in that deceptive growth area? As the demand is starting to build, can we identify it earlier than what our competitors do? So here's one way that we could go about doing that. 3D printing, it's a maturing technology. 3D printers are getting better all the time. I personally own 3 of them. But this is something that if I go back 5 years ago, 3D printers existed 5 years ago, but not nearly as many people were using them. They weren't as capable 5 years ago as what they are today. This is a rapidly advancing technology. But one way I could gather clues about market demand, I can use web scraping software, which I did for this slide. I can go out to social media sites and I can scrape comments. All I did here was I used Mozinda as Mozinda was a piece of software that I used for web scraping. I told it to go to Twitter and to start downloading every tweet that it could find that mentioned 3D printing. And then I can take the results of that web scraping and I can do sentiment analysis on it to find out, are people talking about 3D printing in a positive or a negative way? So this is one way that I could go about assessing, are people even talking about this technology? How many people are making comments about, I'm looking forward to this printer coming out, or comments that would lead me to believe they are potential customers? But I want to point out there is a flaw in focus groups. There is a flaw in going out and doing something like web scraping Twitter to find out what people are saying. Blog comments, tweets, Google searches, they all are indicators of interest, but they're free. They do not indicate any financial support. They don't indicate that people are willing to actually spend money. And so I could find that there's millions of people doing Google searches for this particular idea or this particular technology. That doesn't mean they're willing to actually part with their money to purchase it. So I just want to emphasize that if I want a better predictor of what people are going to buy, these may be some clues, but they are far from definitive because this does not demonstrate that they're willing to invest. Here's one other thing that I could do to find out in general. Now this is not specific to a product. This is more about a category. But 3D printing, if I wanted to find out, is 3D printing just a fad, which I don't believe at all, but if I wanted to see how fast 3D printing is growing as an occupation, I could go out with a premium account on LinkedIn and just do a search for how many people currently have 3D print in their job title. For the geographic area that I was looking at, and this was not a nationwide search, this was a very narrow geographic search, but I just did a search. How many people have 3D print in their job title? I found 450 people in the area that I was looking in. I could look at this nationwide, and I could do it once a month, and I could actually plot the growth of jobs related to 3D printing. Now this demonstrates that there is money behind it because people are being hired to do this. But where I want to go with the presentation and the time we have left tonight is looking at, can I use something like crowdsource funding to predict where a technology is going, to predict what products are going to be very popular, to predict is there interest in this great idea or what I think is a great idea for a new product that I just developed. So for anyone that's not familiar with Kickstarter, I'm guessing the majority of you probably are, but if we have anyone not familiar with Kickstarter, just a real brief view of it. If I come up with an idea for a product, but I don't have the funding to bring this product to life, I can make a video describing it. I can show some drawings. I may even show a prototype that I've made. I can put that on Kickstarter, and I can ask people to pledge money to bring this project to life. What I have to do is set a amount, and let's just say for sake of argument, I need $50,000 to purchase materials and purchase a couple pieces of equipment to make this product. And I may promise my backers, if you pledge $150 to me, then when I hit my goal of raising $50,000, I'm going to purchase this material, these machines, I'm going to build these products, and I will send you one of them. So basically what I'm doing is I'm selling a product that has not been made yet. Now obviously there's a risk to this. There are some con artists that go on to places like Kickstarter or Indiegogo. They run what looks to be a very nice looking project. People donate to it, and then they take off with the money. That happens sometimes. Actually, less than you might expect, but it does happen. There's also times people pledge money to these projects, and then the person that came up with the idea runs into unexpected problems, and they run out of money. But the basic concept is people pledge. The person that had the idea gets the money minus a percentage that Kickstarter keeps for offering the service. They build the product, they ship it to the backers. What I got to wondering about, if I look at what types of things are the backer community actually putting money up for, can I use that as a predictor of what's really going to be popular in the future? So this is just one example here. This is a screenshot from a Kickstarter page for what I thought was a really interesting little product. You can see that there is over $1.1 million pledged to bring this project to life. It was funded more than 4,000% from what the person who created this said they needed. So this was a very popular project. So what I did with the help of a couple of students, Christina Douglas and Nathan Lewis, we started looking at 602 technology projects on Kickstarter. Now, Kickstarter has several categories of projects. There are some that are clothing related, some that are performing arts. We limited our view to 602 technology projects. This is where you pledge money and you're actually going to get a physical item. So we eliminated websites, we eliminated software. All of these are hardware related projects. And we looked at 602 of them, and the first thing we had to do was we had to categorize them because these 602 projects covered so many different types of things, everything from new types of pedals for bicycles, new types of bike computers you could put on your bicycle, smart watches, smart headphones. We had to come up with some way of categorizing this, and some items would really fall into more than one. For example, if I come up with a really neat type of speaker for a bicycle, is that a transportation-related project or is that a sound-related project? So we went through, we did our very best to define what was included in each of these categories. We actually have a list of operational definitions for each one of these categories. And then once we had all 602 Kickstarter projects, and this was over a 3-month period, but once we had all 602 projects categorized, we went in and we started looking at, well, what percentage of these projects were actually successful? If I, as the creator of the project, said I need $50,000 and only $40,000 is pledged, nobody's credit card gets charged and I do not get a dime. If I say I need $50,000 and $55,000 are pledged, then I get my $55,000, everyone's credit card gets charged, I get my 55 minus the percentage that Kickstarter keeps, but the project is funded if it gets to 100% funding. Well, I created another category, and this was just for analysis purposes, but I called it superfunded projects. Superfunded just means the project was funded at least twice as much as what the person who created the project said they needed. So when you look at this chart, for example, computing and telecommunications, that's the 4th bar, you'll see that there were over 60 projects in computing and telecommunications that are red. Those were 60 projects that failed to get funded. There were about 25 projects that were funded between 100 and 200%, and then there's about another 15 projects that were funded beyond 200%. So this just kind of gives you a high-level view about how many projects fell into each category. Robotics was actually a very small category. UAVs, actually a very small category. That actually surprised me. I thought that Kickstarter would have had more UAVs, but during a 3-month period that we were looking at, there just weren't that many projects related to drones. What were the big projects? Telecommunications and computing, safety and security, fitness and nutrition, and wearables, smartwatches mainly. But what this tells me, if I'm looking at this, robotics, these are not industrial robots. These are more of consumer robots. Think of Roomba. Consumer robots, there were several projects available on Kickstarter, but what I can see is very few of them were actually funded, and the ones that were funded between 100 and 200%. There weren't many projects that were funded heavily. In comparison, if I go over here and look at my sound projects, these are speakers and headphone related projects. I see that about half of them were funded and nearly a quarter of them were super funded. Well, with all of the data that I had, I could look at what was the average percent funding for a given type of project. Well, if I look at things like fitness and nutrition, on average, my fitness and nutrition projects were only funded about 50%. Some of those were special nutritional drinks that somebody came up with a formula and they needed equipment to actually start manufacturing. Home and garden, power generation, robotics, safety and security products, on average, those product categories were less than 100% funded. When I look at what were the really big things, what were people willing to spend money on, 3D printing was huge. the average 3D printing project, basically these were 3D printers that you could buy, on average they were being funded 600% of what the creator of the project was asking for. I've got one other slide here just breaking it down into real dollars rather than looking at percentages. How many dollars were pledged for each project type? Well, looking at that, on Kickstarter over the span of 3 months, nearly $7 million were pledged for speakers and headphones. What that tells me is if I am a business person, I'm thinking about developing a new type of speaker or headphone, this tells me there are a lot of people out there willing to actually put money behind it to buy that because that is a big category. 3D printing, nearly $6 million was spent. Computing and telecommunications, just over $4 million. But if I look at camera equipment, relatively speaking, camera equipment was less than $2 million pledged. So if I look at what was the most popular thing on Kickstarter, where were people willing to spend money or to pledge money, that tells me that based on crowdsourced funding, one of the hot topics, one of the things people are actually willing to put their money behind was sound projects. Well, I went into Statista to look at how much money do people spend on headphones and Bluetooth speakers and things like that. Here's what the Bluetooth speaker market looks like in the United States from 2013 to 2017. This is just the US market. This is in millions of dollars. And what I can see is Bluetooth speakers in the United States in 2017 was over $1 billion, $1.1 billion in Bluetooth speakers. So this is consistent with what I saw at Kickstarter. People are willing to spend money on it. If I'm trying to develop a new product, this seems to be a hot area. Now again, this doesn't tell me they're interested in my exact product, but it tells me the product category is a popular one that people are spending a lot of money on. Statista also asked people in a survey, how much money would you be willing to spend on new headphones? Now, a lot of people are looking for low-end headphones. Nearly a quarter of the people, or approximately a quarter of the people, said they'd be willing to spend up to $25 on headphones. They're looking for the value-based ones. But there's 10% of the market out there that's willing to spend more than $150 on headphones. So this just, like I said, it's qualitative. I've not done any type of regression analysis or anything. But when I start looking at what are the hot topics in Kickstarter, they appear to be the things that people are spending money on or people are willing to spend the money on. Here's shipments of headphones. So Bluetooth speakers, headphones, very, very popular, and that's reflected in what I saw in the Kickstarter data. So if I have an idea for a new product, instead of just looking at my current competitors, I could also go out and look at places like Kickstarter and Indiegogo to try and see how much interest are people showing on crowdsourced funding sites like those to give me an idea of how much market demand is there for my product category. Well, that's the end of my presentation. This is my contact information if you want to email me. But I was told to shoot for 45 minutes, and now I'd be more than happy to take any questions that anyone might have.
Thank you very much again, John, for your presentation.
Oh, my pleasure.
We have 5 to 10 minutes time for questions and answers. You can post your questions in the Q&A section of the WebEx tool. I should remind you that you can find the recording of this webinar on ASQ Innovation Division YouTube channel. So we'll be waiting for some questions that we posted. So one question that I have is, what happens when, can you elaborate more, John, because what happens when we have push but not pull?
Oh, good question. The push but no pull, that's what I referred to semi-jokingly as the solution in search of a problem. Oftentimes that means somebody thought it was a good idea, and I'll just give you one example. Early in my career, I worked for General Motors. About the time that I joined General Motors, they went through a phase where every button on the radio was a push button. They had removed the dials. And for decades prior to this would have been 1988 when I started at General Motors. For decades, people were accustomed to having a volume dial and having a tuning dial that you would just rotate clockwise or counterclockwise. When General Motors made the switch, it was their Delco Electronics division, they made the switch to an entirely push-button radio. You had a seek up and a seek down button, but there was no dial. And that was something that, from a technology standpoint, I thought it was kind of cool, but there was a tremendous amount of negative feedback from drivers saying, I don't like this. I have to take my eyes off the road to see what button I'm hitting, where I'm so accustomed to just reaching down and grabbing a dial to rotate, to either turn the volume up or down or to change channels. And so that was what I would call an example of the solution in search of a problem. Somebody decided to switch over to buttons, but the market really did not like that. And within a year or two, GM switched back to having dials on the radios rather than being all push button. But that's what happens sometimes. Depending on the product, sometimes people will go along with it. If it's a necessity, they might not like it. They may complain about it. But if what you're producing is a necessity, they may continue to buy it.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So one more question that I have is the idea behind the Kickstarter and Indiegogo that you mentioned is that like putting a project on the these sites and looking for the demand of the market.
Yes, the basic idea behind Kickstarter and Indiegogo is a funding mechanism for people that have good ideas, but they don't have the money to bring the idea to fruition. What it's really doing is it's spreading the risk rather than one person having to go to the bank and take out a $50,000 or $100,000 loan to make a product. It's a platform to allow people with ideas to offer an advance purchase to people that are willing to front the money. And so the risk is being distributed across a couple of hundred backers, people that are willing to pledge the money so that the person with the idea can go out and purchase material to actually build the product. Like I said, sometimes backers get burned. They put the money up and then either the person completely disappears or the person runs into technical problems and they're not able to deliver what they promised. But that's the idea behind the websites, is allowing people who are interested and willing to risk giving money to strangers in order to have the newest item. When you think about Everett Rogers' Diffusion of Innovation, your innovators and your early adopters are the people that are using sites like Kickstarter to look for new things that they might want to replace items they already have, whether it's a new Bluetooth speaker or a new computer case or whatever it may be. So it's a kind of a meeting place between people that have ideas and early adopters and innovators that have money they're willing to put up to back a project.
Thank you very much.
Mm-hmm.
You can post your questions on the Q&A section of the WebEx tool. We still have time for some questions and answers. So I think if there is no questions, we can end this event. Thank you very much again, John, for your presentation. And thank you. Yes.
Just going to say my pleasure to be here with you. And again, my contact information is on the screen. If anybody wants to email me directly after the presentation, that's fine too.
Thank you, John. Thank you all again for joining this webinar, and have a good night.
Thank you.